They didn't just steal my business. They stole my legacy and tried to erase me from it. This is the story of one man who refused to stay silent and fought his own family to get it all back. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The flour still clung to my hands like a second skin as I stood in the heart of Voss Family Bakery. It was well past midnight on the 15th anniversary of the shop my grandfather built from nothing. The ovens had finally cooled, but the air still carried that warm, golden scent of fresh bread, the scent of Legacy Loaf. My Legacy Loaf. I wiped my forehead with the back of my wrist, staring at the last golden loaf resting on the wooden rack. 33 years old, and this was the one thing in my life that had never let me down. The one thing I had poured every late night, every failed batch, every quiet sacrifice into. Elena Reyes laughed from the front counter, her voice bright. "Fenric, you should see the line today. They were asking for your bread before we even opened." Theo Lang, our young assistant, was already stacking the empty trays, grinning like a kid on Christmas. "Boss, this batch, man, it's perfect. People are calling it magic." I smiled, small and tired, but real. For the first time in weeks, the weight on my chest felt a little lighter. Then the bell above the back door chimed softly. My family had arrived for the private celebration. Torin Voss walked in first, my father, shoulders squared like he owned the whole city. My mother, Seraph, followed close behind, her silk scarf catching the warm light. And then my older sister, Kael, holding a bottle of wine she probably hadn't paid for herself. We sat around the old oak table in the corner, the same table my grandfather Draven used to sit at every morning with his coffee and his dreams. I poured everyone a glass, raised mine. "To 15 years, I said quietly, and to Grandpa Draven, who taught me that bread isn't just food, it's memory." Glasses clinked. For a moment, everything felt right. Then my father cleared his throat. "Fenric," he began, voice calm, almost gentle. Too gentle. "We need to talk about the future of the bakery." I lowered my glass slowly. Seraph placed her hand on the table, fingers perfectly still. "We've made a decision," she said. "A good one, for all of us." Kael wouldn't meet my eyes. She kept staring at the crumbs on the tablecloth. My stomach tightened. "What decision?" I asked. Torin leaned forward, folding his hands. "We signed the papers this afternoon. 65% of the business, along with the full rights to the brand and every recipe, especially the Legacy Loaf, has been transferred to Sweet Corp." The words landed like cold stones in still water. I felt the air leave the room. "They're a big player," my mother continued, as if she were talking about the weather. "They'll expand the brand nationally. We'll all get a very nice payout. You won't have to work these crazy hours anymore." My mouth went dry. I looked at each of them, one by one. "You signed it?" My voice came out quieter than I wanted. "Without telling me?" Kael finally spoke, her tone defensive. "It's not like you own everything, Fenric. We're family. We made the best choice for everyone." Best choice. The phrase echoed in my head like a slap. I stared at the loaf cooling on the rack, the bread that carried my grandfather's name, my sleepless nights, my blood, sweat, and every dream I had left after Isolde walked out and left me raising Kael alone. They had erased me. My name, the one that should have been listed as creator and owner, was gone, wiped clean, replaced by corporate paperwork and family signatures. Elena and Theo had gone quiet near the counter. They could sense something was wrong, but they didn't dare come closer. I felt my hands start to shake, not from anger yet, from something deeper, betrayal so sharp it cut straight through 15 years of loyalty. I looked at my father, the man who once told me blood is thicker than water. I looked at my mother, the woman who used to kiss my forehead when I burned my fingers on the oven as a boy. I looked at my sister, who I had covered for, helped, and protected more times than I could count. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not with shouting or tears, just a quiet, terrible fracture. Because right then, I understood. They hadn't just sold the bakery, they had sold me, and they did it with smiles on their faces. The days after that night blurred into something heavy and gray. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's calm face across the oak table, heard my mother's soft voice saying, "We made the best choice for everyone." Best choice. Those two words kept circling in my head like smoke that wouldn't clear. Kael noticed everything. "Daddy, why aren't we going to the bakery anymore?" he asked on the third morning, standing in his dinosaur pajamas, clutching the little wooden spoon I had carved for him last Christmas. I knelt down, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're taking a little break, buddy." He tilted his head, those big brown eyes searching mine. "But you love the bakery. You always say it's our special place." I pulled him into a hug so he wouldn't see my face. "Yeah, I do." The truth was heavier than I could explain to a 6-year-old. Every afternoon, I sat at the small kitchen table in our apartment with boxes of old documents spread out in front of me, papers I had never bothered to read carefully before. Because I had trusted them. I trusted my family. Page after page, the truth unfolded in cold black ink. Over a year ago, long before that anniversary night, they had quietly formed a new LLC under the Voss name. They had re-registered the trademark Voss Family Bakery and listed the Legacy Loaf recipe as company property. My name appeared nowhere as the creator, only as an employee. Employee. I stared at the signature lines. My father's bold handwriting, my mother's elegant swirl. Even Calix had signed as a witness. They had planned this while I was still waking up at 4 a.m. to perfect the starter dough, while I was skipping Kael's school events because the bakery needed me, while I was pouring every extra dollar back into the ovens and the flour suppliers. I was the one who saved the shop when Grandpa Draven got sick. I was the one who stayed late every single night developing that bread until people drove across the city just to taste it. And they had turned my life's work into something they could sell behind my back. My phone buzzed. Elena Reyes. "Fenric, the staff are scared. Corporate people came by yesterday asking about new management. Are we losing our jobs?" I didn't know how to answer her. Another message came in right after. Theo Lang. "Boss, I really like working here. Please tell me this isn't ending." I set the phone down and pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw stars. Later that evening, another text arrived, this one from Mrs. Evelyn Hart, the old lady who had been coming to the bakery every Sunday for 8 years. She used to sit in the corner with her tea and tell me stories about her late husband while eating my bread. "Dear Fenric, I heard what happened. My heart aches for you. That bread wasn't just dough and salt, it was your soul on that counter. Don't let them take that from you. But I'm also disappointed. Families should lift each other up, not sell each other out." Her words hit harder than any legal paper. That night, after I put Kael to bed, I sat alone in the dark living room with only the small lamp on. I kept replaying every moment. The times my father patted my shoulder and said, "You're the heart of this place, son." The times my mother brought me soup when I worked through the night. The times Calix laughed and told me I was too good for my own good. All of it felt poisoned now. I realized something painful and clear. I had always been the worker, the fixer, the one who sacrificed. They had only ever been the ones who benefited. A slow, burning anger began to settle deep in my chest. Not loud, not explosive, just steady, like a fire that had been smoldering under ash for years and was finally finding oxygen. I pulled out an old notebook, the same one I used to sketch new recipes. This time, I didn't write ingredients. I started writing dates, conversations I could remember, promises they had made. Every small sign I had ignored because I wanted to believe we were a real family. I wrote slowly, carefully. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but one thing had become painfully obvious. I could not let this be the end of my story. Or Kael's. The nights kept stretching longer. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, Kael's soft breathing coming from the next room, while the weight of those signed papers pressed down on my chest like a stone I couldn't push off. Every quiet hour felt like another crack forming inside me. Until one morning, something shifted. I couldn't keep swallowing the silence anymore. I picked up my phone with unsteady hands and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Mr. Raven answered on the third ring, his voice steady and familiar. "Fenric, it's been a while." I told him everything, not in a rush of anger, but slowly, carefully, like I was laying out broken pieces of glass. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause. "I'll need to see the documents," he said quietly. "But from what you've described, this doesn't sound right." That afternoon, I met Jax Rivera at a small coffee shop 2 blocks from the bakery. He had been my closest friend back when we were both young chefs scraping by in the industry. Now he worked as a consultant on intellectual property for food brands. He slid a thick envelope across the table. "I pulled every email, every time-stamped photo, and every development note you sent me over the years," he said, his eyes serious. "You created the Legacy Loaf, Fenric, not them. These records prove the timeline." I stared at the papers, my throat tight. Jax leaned in a little closer. "You okay?" I shook my head slowly. I thought they had my back. Later that same evening, there was a soft knock at my apartment door. Mrs. Evelyn Hart stood in the hallway, holding a small paper bag. "I brought you some tea," she said gently. "The kind that helps when your heart feels too heavy." We sat at the kitchen table. She didn't offer empty comfort. Instead, she looked at me with those kind but sharp eyes and spoke plainly. "That bread of yours, it wasn't just flour and water, Fenric. It was patience. It was love. It was the memory of your grandfather Draven. Talent like that doesn't come from nowhere, and it certainly doesn't belong to people who treat it like a product to sell." Her words settled deep. For the first time in days, I felt something other than pain. I felt clarity. The phone calls from my family started soon after. First my father, Torin. His voice was firm, almost disappointed. "Fenric, this resistance of yours, it's selfish. We're trying to secure a future for all of us. Why can't you see that?" Then my mother, Seraph, softer but no less cutting. "You've always been so dramatic, sweetheart. We raised you better than this. Family means sharing success, not hoarding it." Calix texted late at night. "Please don't make this ugly. We're all hurting here. Think about what's best for everyone." Each message landed like another small wound, but instead of breaking me further, they did something else. They hardened something inside. I was done being the quiet son, the loyal brother, the one who always gave. I began to move differently. Every evening after Kael fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with Mr. Raven on speakerphone and Jack sending documents. I organized dates, saved every old email, photographed every notebook page where I had scribbled early versions of the Legacy Loaf recipe. I worked in silence, methodically, like I was editing the most important film of my life. The fear was still there, quiet and cold in my stomach. But beneath it, a new feeling was growing. Determination. One night, after another tense call with my sister, I walked into the small kitchen of our apartment. The lights were low. Kael was already asleep on the couch, curled up under his favorite blanket, his little chest rising and falling peacefully. I stood there for a long time, just watching him. His small hand still clutched the wooden spoon I had made for him, the one he liked to help me with whenever we baked together at home. In that quiet moment, something inside me settled into place. I wasn't fighting just for myself anymore. I was fighting for him, for the boy who deserved to know his father hadn't given up everything without a fight. I whispered into the dim light, my voice barely above a breath. I'm not going to let them take this from us, Kael. Not the bread, not the legacy Grandpa left, and not the future you deserve. The words felt heavy, but they also felt true. For the first time since that anniversary night, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a father, and a man who was finally ready to stand up. The bakery was dark except for the single overhead light above the old oak table. It was well past closing time. The ovens were cold, the display cases empty. Only the faint scent of yeast and flour still lingered in the air, a ghost of everything this place had once meant to me. I had asked for one last family meeting. No lawyers in the beginning. Just us. Elena Reyes and Theo Lang sat quietly on one side of the table, their faces tense. They had come as witnesses, not fighters. Mrs. Evelyn Hart had shown up unexpectedly, saying she felt she needed to be here. She sat near the end with her hands folded, calm but watchful. The door opened. Torin walked in first, shoulders straight, expression confident. Sarah followed, her scarf neatly draped as always. Calix came last, clutching her purse like a shield. They sat down across from me. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my father broke the silence. So, you wanted to talk, Fenric? I looked at each of them slowly. My hands were steady now. My voice, when it came, was quiet but clear. Yes. One last time. I placed a folder on the table. Not slammed, just laid down gently. I've spent the last few weeks looking at everything, I said. The new LLC you created. The trademark registration changed over a year ago. The way my name was removed as the creator of the Legacy Loaf. The contract you signed with Sweet Corp. Torin's jaw tightened slightly. Seraph's fingers twitched on the edge of the table. Calix looked away. You planned this while I was still here every single day, I continued, my tone even. While I was developing the recipe Grandpa Draven inspired. While I was keeping this place alive after he got sick. You took my work, and you tried to sell it without me. The air grew thick. Calix's eyes filled with tears. Fenric, please, she whispered, voice trembling. We're doing this for the family, for all of us. Don't make it ugly. Think about the future, about Kael. She reached across the table as if to touch my hand. I didn't pull away. I simply looked at her. Mrs. Evelyn Hart spoke then, her voice soft but steady, cutting through the tension like a quiet knife. I've been coming here for 8 years, she said. I watched Fenric stay until 2 in the morning, testing batch after batch until the bread tasted like home. I saw him turn this struggling bakery into something people drove across town for. He didn't just bake bread. He carried his grandfather's legacy in his hands. And you tried to take that away from him. Her words hung in the room. Torin shifted in his chair. Seraph's face had gone pale. Then Jax Rivera stepped forward from the shadows near the back counter. He had been waiting quietly. He placed his laptop on the table and turned the screen toward them. I have every email Fenric sent me during the development of the Legacy Loaf, he said calmly. Timestamps, recipe iterations, photos of early tests, legal records showing Fenric as the sole creator. You can't erase that. The screen glowed with undeniable proof. Torin's confident mask cracked. His eyes widened for the first time, real fear flickering across his face. Seraph's hand flew to her throat. Calix stared at the screen, tears falling freely now, but they no longer looked like weapons. They looked like regret. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could have been. I stood up slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I'm not going to scream, I said quietly, looking straight at them. I'm not going to beg. I'm done being the one who gives everything and gets nothing back. My gaze moved from my father to my mother to my sister. I will not let you steal Grandpa Draven's legacy or my son's future any longer. The words settled in the room like final stones. No one spoke. For the first time since that anniversary night, I wasn't the one hurting the most. I was the one in control. The weeks that followed the meeting at the oak table moved like a slow, heavy current. Mr. Raven took the lead with quiet precision. He filed the necessary motions, presented the timestamps, the emails, the development records, and the long history of my labor in that bakery. The court listened. One crisp morning, the judge issued a temporary injunction halting any transfer of the brand or the Legacy Loaf recipe to Sweet Corp. The relief I felt wasn't loud or triumphant. It was a deep, trembling exhale I had been holding for too long. In the end, the evidence spoke louder than any argument. The court recognized my ownership of the intellectual property, the signatures, the erased name, the hidden LLC. It all unraveled under the weight of truth. Torin and Seraph were required to sign agreements returning the majority shares, paying restitution for damages, and stepping away completely from Voss Family Bakery. They didn't fight it in the end. I saw them only once more, briefly, in the lawyer's office. My father's shoulders were no longer squared with confidence. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she signed the papers. They looked smaller somehow, older. Calix didn't attend that final meeting. Instead, a few days later, she sent a short message. Fenric, I was wrong. I watched everything fall apart and realized how far we went. I'm sorry. If you ever want to talk, just us, I'm here. I didn't reply right away. The wound was still too fresh, but I didn't delete the message either. Inside the bakery, things began to settle differently. I sat down with Elena Reyes and Theo lying in the same quiet corner where everything had started. I offered them stable positions with better pay and real stakes in the future of the shop. Elena's eyes glistened as she nodded. Theo grinned through obvious relief, already talking about new bread experiments he wanted to try. Evelyn Hart became a quiet partner in her own way. She brought her longtime friends, shared stories, and helped grow the circle of loyal customers who came not just for the bread, but for the feeling of coming home. And then, one quiet Sunday morning, the bakery was mine again, fully, legally, undeniably. The light filtered through the front windows as I unlocked the door. The ovens hummed back to life with a familiar warmth. I measured the flour, the water, the salt, and the starter with hands that no longer shook. Kael sat on a tall wooden stool beside the work counter, his small legs swinging. He watched every movement with wide, curious eyes, the same way he used to when he was even smaller. I shaped the dough carefully, scoring the top with the same pattern my grandfather Draven had taught me years ago. As the loaves went into the oven, the rich golden scent slowly filled the entire space. The scent of Legacy Loaf, but this time it carried something new. It carried peace. I stood there, flour on my apron, watching the timer count down. Kael reached out and touched my arm gently. Daddy, is the bakery ours again? I looked down at him and smiled. A real smile that reached all the way to my tired eyes. Yeah, buddy, it's ours. In that moment, the weight I had carried for so long finally began to lift. I had learned something profound through all the pain. Trust in a family must be paired with respect. Protecting what you love, your passion, your work, your child's future, is not selfishness. It is responsibility. Sometimes you have to be strong enough to cut away what no longer serves you so you can hold on tightly to what truly matters. And justice. Justice doesn't always arrive with raised voices or dramatic scenes. It comes quietly, through patience, through sleepless nights of careful documentation, through the undeniable power of truth. As the timer beeped softly and I pulled the first perfect loaf from the oven, its crust crackling with warmth, I felt my grandfather's presence in the quiet kitchen, not in anger, but in pride. This was no longer just a bakery. It was a legacy reclaimed. This story reminds us that the hardest battles are often fought in silence, and that true healing begins when we choose to protect what matters most, even when it means letting go of the family we thought we knew. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for being here and letting this story live within your heart. If it moved you, I hope you'll walk beside us through more journeys of the Wild West, stories filled with truth, endurance, and grace. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and stay close. Together, we'll keep riding across these wide-open lands of memory and hope. Thank you. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. Our narratives bring inspiration from the past, recreated with fictional and dramatized interpretations for entertainment purposes only. AI tools serve as creative support, but the storytelling, editing, and emotional refinement are handled by our team to guarantee authenticity. We comply with content policies for AI use, avoiding impersonations, identity fabrication, or historically misleading images. All visual and audio content is legally sourced. Redistribution or modification requires prior written approval. Thank you for honoring creativity, collaboration, and storytelling done with heart.